Ladies and gentlemen, our program is about to begin. As a courtesy to those around you, please silence all cell phones. Get ready to... Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Ondine Fortune, 2014 Pollie Conference Co-Chair.
Hello! Wow, look at this packed room. Is everybody having a great time? How was the ball game last night? Excellent, excellent. Well, we are looking forward to an excellent session, and I am very, very proud to introduce our Lieutenant Governor of California, Gavin Newsom, who has recently written a book called Citizenville. And one little interesting anecdote is that there's a quote in it from Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton. So yes, which is perfect opportunity here with this being a bipartisan organization. So I actually check it out. So now I introduce. Thank you. Also from the state of Kentucky, all right, from Dale Emmons, our past president, I offer you some bourbon candy.
Bourbon candy, excellent. I'm of age. Thank you. Thank you, Ondine. Thank you. And thank you all very much for the opportunity to say some words. I was just at a panel about urban bicycling, so I'm going to have to get some of those thoughts out of my mind and broaden them. But I want to just say a few words about three subjects that I think are relevant to most of you in this room and challenge you in the context of my remarks to think more broadly past Election Day. And here are the three areas I want to briefly focus on. One's the issue of citizenship. Two is technology in the broadest sense of the term. And number three, perhaps more important than any, is the issue of leadership and how those things are converging and how they are recalibrating themselves. I'll begin, though, quickly with something you already know, and that was how inspired I was, and even those of you on the other side of the political aisle must have been inspired in 2008 with the Barack Obama campaign. And I say that to connect those dots. You recall in 2008, that campaign, 35,000 self-organizing communities coming together across every conceivable difference. This platform for engagement, myBarackObama.com. A campaign that was predicated on a fundamental notion that one-way conversations are dead, and it's all about two-way conversations. A campaign that success resonating from that foundational principle that change starts from the bottom up. Yes, we can. That campaign culminating obviously successfully, and a desire by then President-elect Barack Obama to continue the conversation. And you may recall this intimately. Many of you may have participated in it. The president-elect said he wanted to continue the conversation past Election Day and focus on the fate and future of our country, as he noted, to restore moral authority back into Washington and also around the rest of the world. And he called people together on an unprecedented day, and he encouraged the online community and folks just like you to show up in person and to talk about what his priorities should be, not just for the next 100 days of his new term, but for the next decade or 2 decades as it relates to the fate and future of the United States and the world we were trying to build. And he came together with a new platform, not myBarackObama.com, the campaign platform, but one called change.gov. And you can even look it up. They still have a static homepage now, and you could see what the invite was. It said to join him in an unprecedented discussion about the future of this country and the world and express what's on your mind. This during the transition, change.gov. And an unprecedented number of people showed up online and in person. And the questions of the day were, what's on your mind? Is it the issue of climate change? Is it the issue of the financial meltdown? Remember, this is just a few months after Lehman Day, September 15, 2008. Was it the issue of the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, the war on terror, broader issues? What's on your mind? Come join the conversation. And folks did. And the president-elect did just what his wife did a couple years back when she was there at the Academy Awards and opened up the envelope, and there Barack Obama stood. Millions of people, bated breath, looking forward to what the collective wisdom was of this country. Was it the war in Iraq? Was it the war in Afghanistan? What was on the American people's mind that fateful night? Well, the number one issue in America during that evening was legalize marijuana. Obviously, some of you participated in that. Maybe not just that night. And the president's response, the president-elect's response, was not dissimilar to your response right there. In fact, he was wildly criticized by that. And he did what 9 out of 10 of us, no, 99 out of 100, and certainly what 100% of you would have recommended of the candidate, or in this case, the transition team. We turned down the site for reconstruction. Change.gov was transferred into the old whitehouse.gov website. This bottom-up candidate immediately became a top-down president. Yes, we can was replaced with yes, he can. The two-way conversation was replaced with a broadcast model, selling down a vision from Washington, D.C. This is not an indictment of President Barack Obama. It's an indictment of the system where we use the tools of technology relatively effectively to amplify voices, to give people more choices in terms of how to participate in a campaign to raise us money, to organize a community to come out and vote. But boy, once the election's over, we turn down that voice. All that energy, all that promise, all that promotion, all of a sudden gives way to a one-way conversation. One thing I know, and I hope all of you remind yourselves and your candidates every single day, is winning a campaign is not governing. How can we use these tools of technology? How can we engage in two-way conversations when it matters the most the day after we get elected? And how do we fundamentally reconcile the world we're now living in? Government is on a collision course with the future. You know this. The industrial economy has run out of steam. It's an atrophy. It's failing. You see the contours of something new everywhere. We were talking about it at the last panel. You all saw what happened to the media industry just a few years back when a guy named Craig came along with a list. And all of a sudden, the entire newspaper industry was gutted, and the financial foundation, the model of financing newspapers was gutted. I know this now a little bit more, having just published that book, Citizenville. You saw the same thing happen. I was mayor of San Francisco at the time. I remember being invited, good to be mayor of San Francisco, right down at the Moscone Center, our big convention and visitors center. Thousands of people in a room, and a guy named Steve walked up on stage with something called iTunes. No one understood it at the moment, but that Virgin Megastore just across the street was on life support. The entire music industry collapsed overnight. Technology radically changing an entire old industry. You've seen the same thing in financial service industry. I've got an uncle, great guy named Rick Newsom, fabulous guy, passed away years ago. He'd probably be on his second or third martini right now and be talking to me about the good old days when you didn't have a choice of a stockbroker. It was $100 commission no matter what, until a guy named Chuck came along and screwed up the entire business. Chuck Schwab and E-Trade. And now is there a city you go where you don't see those damn pink mustaches on the fronts of cars? All the, 9 out of 10 of you fancy folks, you all have that app because a guy named Travis came along, something called Uber Cab, finally taken on, right? Some applause here. Taking on the old entrenched industrial model of a taxi cab industry. The share economy, Airbnb, everything's taking place now. Whitewater's a change, something old to something new, but in government, we're still operating with the old operating system. We're still debating the size of the machine. Isn't that your campaign? How big should the vending machine be? Donald Kettle wrote a lot about this years ago, political scientist no one's ever heard of. Talked about government being a giant vending machine. You put in your dollar taxes and you get, choices you didn't necessarily participate in. Police, fire, education, healthcare, national defense. And if you don't like what you get, you do what all of us have done. with a vending machine, you kick the machine, you shake the machine. That's the election, or that's the Tea Party movement, or the Occupy, what's left of the Occupy movement on the other side. But it's still a framework of an old industrial mindset, machine thinking, assembly line thinking, factory thinking. We're going from something old to something new. And in government, we're not communicating effectively. All the anxiety, all that frustration, this Gatsby curve that exists, what's happening, the retooling of our economy, the merger of IT and globalization, we're not effectively explaining this. What world are we living in? It's the question we should ask and answer every single day. It's a question candidates should be forced to ask every single day. What are the trend lines that define this world? And how is it radically altering the workplace, our schools and industries? We're not having that conversation. Government's on a collision course with the future. And is it any wonder your candidates, for all their energy, all their passion, all their authenticity, all that excitement on election day, tend to term out just like everybody else? It's as if governing de-geniuses you. Abraham Lincoln had a wonderful quote, said, we're all born originals, but we die copies. In so many ways that describes so many campaigns and candidates for elected office. We get disappointed because the system bears them down. They lose that voice. They lose that sense of purpose. And all of a sudden we say, well, we'll give you another chance to get reelected because you'll be termed out, you'll be yourself. And now we're left so disappointed over and over again. They die copies too often. We have got to argue for something radically different. And we've got to start explaining this world that we're living in. And that brings up this second point. You know the biggest transformation in the history of mankind was 1765 and the advent of the modern steam engine, which basically gave us this industrial economy that we've all inherited, gave us mass production, factories. It was the ability, as Andrew McAfee writes about in his new book, the ability to triumph over the limitations of muscle power. And it created the standardization of products at scale and has provided us so much. But now, he argues, we're entering the second machine age. And that is self-evident to all of you. And that's what's happened with technology and is happening. The examples I gave you of the old industrial mindset and the business practices, the past giving way to something new. But you ain't seen nothing yet. You know that. The combinatorial nature of technology, the convergence of technology in genomics and synthetic biology, the merger of artificial intelligence and big data, robotics, the Internet of Things, radically changing everything. The rate and speed is unimaginable compared to where it was even 10 years ago. Remember the great quote, I don't know if you heard this, Tom Freeman, when was asked, what world, Tom, are we living in? He said, let me describe it as such. He said, I wrote a book. Which one, Tom? Well, 2005, my book was on the New York Times bestseller, sold 4.5 million copies, called The World is Flat. I talked about the impact of globalization and technology. 2005. And he says, go back in the book, go into the first edition, and look under the index, look under F, FA, FC. Facebook is not even there. Here's a book about technology and globalization. New York Times bestseller list in 2005. Facebook didn't exist. Twitter was a sound. The cloud was in the sky. 4G was a parking space. LinkedIn, a prison. Big data was a rap star. And Skype, for most of us, was a typo. All of those things are ubiquitous in our lives, and none of those things existed just 7 or 8 years ago. His point, we're no longer living in a connected, but a hyper-connected world. No longer interconnected, but truly interdependent. But now with the combinatorial nature of technology and the merging of these technologies, the rate and change into the future is in real time and unimaginable. You want to talk about stagnant wages. Is it any coincidence that the personal computer was Time Magazine's Person of the Year in 1982? About the same time we started to see the college premium and degree inflation and stagnant wages for those without a college degree and those high school dropouts with declining income. Is it any surprise the anxieties that exist in states like California of the haves and the have-nots, a coastal economy, highly educated and skilled economy here in San Diego and Silicon Valley, versus the inland part of the state? I come from a county, 4.7% unemployment, the lowest in the state of California. Marin County, you're a stone's throw away from Imperial County right here at 22.0% unemployment. Colusa County, 25.9%. The old and the new. The white waters of change. And folks like me are not explaining this world in a very effective way, in a way that people can understand. And we're not arguing about what to do about it. We're focused more, again, in that campaign framework on who's to blame. Final point, leadership. I'm of this opinion, having just watched, as you all did, and lamented about the life of Martin Luther King, as we celebrated that 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, but more recently of Nelson Mandela. I bet all you fancy smart folks with all your degrees and all your political instincts probably couldn't sit around that table and tell any of your colleagues even two things that Nelson Mandela did when he was president of South Africa. Policy things. Legislation he introduced. You can symbolically reference, well, he did, but you'd have a hard time. But all of you will recognize his extraordinary contributions and his extraordinary talent and commitment and his leadership. But not those few short years when he served as president. You know, we didn't celebrate the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, ex-President Martin Luther King. I don't know anyone that's ever celebrated the life and times of Nelson Mandela that doesn't celebrate his time in prison and his moral authority. I don't know anybody in California that just this last week, ever thought that it mattered that Cesar Chavez wasn't the ex-governor, or for that matter, Gandhi being an ex-prime minister. All these people stepped up and stepped in. It's interesting, you look at Gandhi, you look at Mandela and King, heck, you can add in Václav Havel. Remember him? The philosopher that became politician, the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia, who talked about how governing degeniused him. At the peak of their influence, all those folks share one thing in common, jail time. Just interesting. The peak of their influence. Think of King in 59 and Mandela up to what, 88? Havel, 85. Back Gandhi in 20s, late 20s. But they all exercise their moral authority. I guess it's a long-winded way of saying this, and it's awkward as a politician. But one thing I've learned the hard way is being in power doesn't mean you have power. And this whole idea you have to be something to do something in a world that's hyper-connected, a world where people are self-organizing, in a world that's bottom-up, not top-down, in a world where command and control and selling down your vision is giving way to something radically different. It's not inside-out, it's outside-in, two-way conversations. In that world, our capacity to lead is extraordinary. And in that world, it's not just about electing people to positions where they're now afforded the opportunity to lead. It's about creating a framework where those in formal authority can exercise their moral authority, and they can engage citizens to be active, to be participatory, and stop treating citizens as subjects, where we do things to you as opposed to doing things with you. Final words. You know this. The demographic push and the technological pull. I've got two daughters under the age of 4, a son in between. My daughter's brain is wired differently. You can't educate her like I was educated. You can't educate these digital natives like I was educated. A lot of us in this room are digital immigrants. We're learning the language of technology, but you got a whole new generation with 60s idealism, with 80s entrepreneurialism, and they're going to demand something radically different. Their world's been conditioned by Amazon, but we're still governing with an old vending machine. You're petitioning us to do more things to you or for you, as opposed to a new framework of co-production, of collaboration. The 21st century is going to be defined by a new operating system: openness, collaboration, true transparency. These are the principles of success, not just in a campaign, but I would argue in terms of a new governing model. And I encourage all of you, with your extraordinary talents, with your extraordinary capacity, to pick candidates that understand these principles, to pick candidates not just to get in positions of power to be termed out and disappointed, but folks that can enliven people's senses, distill a sense of well-being, can explain the world we're walking into. It can begin to retool and reimagine a 21st century approach to delivering on the promises that they promote during campaigns. Thank you all very, very much.
Wow. Thank you very much, Lieutenant Governor, for being here, and that was wonderful. I would now like to introduce our next guest, and this is Kamneev Singh. He is with Call Fire. He is the co-founder and head of sales and support. He's having a chat with the Lieutenant Governor. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
Kamneev Singh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not intimidating at all to go right after Gavin Newsom. Absolutely. All right. So, as was mentioned, I'm president and co-founder of Call Fire. All right, and Call Fire, we're a software company. Let me find our clicker here. All right. We help people communicate more effectively using telephones in a wide variety of ways. All right. Over the course of the last 8 years or so, we've built up a community of very vibrant customers, about 250,000 signups across all our brands. All right. In any given day, we can contact with a phone call about 20 million people and give them a message and get a little bit of feedback in that message as well. Now, a little bit of context on that, that means that we can contact every person in California in about a day and a half. That took us a long time to build. That's a significant infrastructure. We're institutionally backed. Morgan Stanley and IGC are our largest investors. I don't want to stand up here and kind of beat our chest about Call Fire. I want to talk to you a little bit about mobile. Lieutenant Governor Newsom was talking about two-way communication. Historically, I think the most ubiquitous technology to actually be able to communicate with people on a political stage has been either a simple phone call, letting them know, robocall, which is we get is one of the most annoying calls to get. But that level of communication has historically been effective, either a television ad or something like that. But when you want to have a two-way communication, real time, right? When you want to actually send out something and get some feedback on whatever you're sending out, you can either go IVR or you can send out a text message, right? And why do I say a text message? A cell phone is an amazing thing. I just want to talk about one of those technologies that we talked about. At no point in human history have we been as connected as we are right now. And everybody from a Kenyan farmer to 80-year-old grandmother, everybody's got a cell phone. It's unbelievable. You can pick up that thing in your pocket and contact another human being on the planet right now. And we don't pause enough to actually think about the ramifications in our lives that technology actually brings, right? A few of the statistics around here are kind of astounding. 90% of adults, American adults, have cell phones in their pocket. A lot of those smartphones, right? Engaging with them. 2/3 of people, I know I do this, we'll be walking around and all of a sudden you find yourself checking your phone. I see a lot of people, you just do it, and whether it rings, buzzes or not, you just find yourself, I think that something's buzzing in my pocket, even if it's not. Right? Now, businesses are engaging with this, but the political world, about half of our revenue as a company comes from text messaging, and a lot of businesses get this. They use it to communicate with their customers and internally. And the political world doesn't seem to be using it that much, and we kind of wondered why. So we wanted to have a dialogue with you guys today and tomorrow about why that is and how the most effective way is to engage with that two-way dialogue, the two-way communication, right? People talk about this idea that we're willing to communicate. We're willing to communicate, but not so much give up our personal data. I'll tell you, if you give them something that's valuable, if you actually share something with a constituent that they want to get, or they're happy to talk about, they will give you their data. They'll give you access to their lives. But you got to be careful. You need to make sure that you're compliant with all the regulatory concerns, and we can help you with that. And any partner that you partner with ought to as well, right? This one bit I want to emphasize, and forgive me for getting into kind of the tactical stuff. Guys, there is no other technology around that will get you 95% open rate within 5 minutes. This is kind of ridiculous. If I send out a message to everybody in this room, I can be relatively confident that within 5 minutes, 95% of you are actually going to read that thing. You can't say that about anything else that exists. Now, I'm not saying that this is a replacement. I'm just saying that it's a pretty powerful addition to what you're using right now. Right? So getting back to what CallFire is. CallFire is a software platform that can help you communicate effectively in 2 ways. We can help you get your message out to your constituents, and we can help you get those messages back in real time and absorb them. And we can help you do it safely. Now, we're going to be talking a little bit more about this at a breakout session about 2:15. We'd love for you to join us. We're happy to engage, and for anybody who's stopping by our booths, we're really excited about working with you. The first purchase will have 50% off. But thank you so much for taking the time to listen to us. And at 2:15, we're going to be going into much more detail about the way that you can use text messaging to great effect, and the traditional IVR and calls as well. Thank you so much for the time, everybody. Enjoy your lunch.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Art Hackney to the stage.
Well, I'm a Republican and I got chills down my spine. In keeping with what the Lieutenant Governor said, I grew up in the era of Peter Pan and Tinkerbell and little sprinkles of fairy dust that could take me anywhere that my mind could go. And today we've got Peter Greenberger, and he's the Twitter fairy. And now I can share where I went in my mind with somebody in a matter of milliseconds, and they can share it with somebody else. So please welcome Peter Greenberger, the Director of Global Political Sales for Twitter.
Thank you, Art. It's nice to be known as a Twitter fairy. Thank you so much, Art, to the AAPC for having me here today. I'm excited to share my thoughts with you. I will attempt to keep my remarks brief and in 140 character or less sound bites, so you can live tweet this presentation about real-time live marketing. And I won't be insulted if you're looking at your phones as long as you are live tweeting this presentation. But before I go into the idea of real-time marketing and a concept that we know at Twitter as winning the moment, I want to talk about 3 things that make Twitter and politics so powerfully connected. The first thing is the public nature of our network. Anything you say or tweet can be very widely distributed very quickly to everyone in the world on Twitter. This is a good thing to tell your candidates when they're thinking about posting something after hours on Twitter. Second, it is conversational. And this goes too to what the Lieutenant Governor was saying. For the first time in history, a citizen can communicate directly with an elected official or with a campaign or with a brand. Similarly, that campaign or elected official or that brand can communicate directly back to that citizen. And all of us can join and watch the conversation. This is something very different and something very, very powerful. The pundits are not just on TV, they're also on the couch, watching TV and commenting on the events of the day. The final thing is this concept of live, of real time. Twitter is the only live, real-time platform at scale. Politics is a contact sport, we know that. But we also know that politics is a real-time sport. And that is why live, real-time storytelling is so critical. We're 1 quarter into 2014, and we've already had some very dramatic live real-time moments. We've had, of course, the Olympics in Sochi, where we saw great acts of sportsmanship. We saw hilarious views of hotels in Sochi that were not prepared for the moment. We saw the Grammys, where Arby's very cleverly started tweeting about Pharrell's hat, and he very cleverly tweeted back. We, of course, saw the selfie that broke Twitter when Ellen tweeted out a photo of her and her friends, had 3 million retweets, and Twitter indeed went down temporarily. And of course, we saw the finale of Breaking Bad, as well as many other TV shows where people are tweeting. You can see something of the scale here. During the Olympics, 72,000 tweets per minute when Team USA beat the Russians, during the hockey game. We saw 254,000 tweets per minute during the Oscars when Ellen took that famous shot. And during the Super Bowl, even though it wasn't a great game, we saw 380,000 tweets per minute during the peak moment of that event. This, we believe, is the year of real-time marketing. We're seeing this now on Madison Avenue. Real-time marketing is advertising's 12th man. If done right, it should focus on the customer. Real-time marketing wake-up call. You see this again and again on Madison Avenue. And you see advertisers jumping in on these moments. You see McDonald's talking about the Olympics in real time while people are watching and talking about what's going on TV. You see skincare products also jumping on during the Oscars. And you see Chevrolet and other brands talking about events happening on the Grammys while people are watching the Grammys. But this is not new to us. In this room, we know about rapid response. My first campaign experience was as a volunteer during the first Clinton campaign in New Hampshire, and I was one of the kids handing out those VHS tapes called The Man from Hope. That was cutting-edge technology in 1991, 1992. I saved one of those tapes. I've got nothing I can play it on. But these two guys, who probably rare among the rest of us, look better now than they did then, George Stephanopoulos and James Carville, both commented on this idea of rapid response. It was born in Little Rock in 91, 92. Everything happens in this 9:30 to 4:30 window. Rapid response used to be responding during that news cycle. I'm sure we all remember that. Think how quaint that sounds now. You get attacked, you got 2 or 3 hours until the 5 o'clock news to come up with a clever response. If you're not on top of something, you're not there. Those words are just as true today as they were then. Every voter a consumer, every consumer a voter. Madison Avenue has long borrowed from politics in determining the tactics that they use. We saw this, Howard Dean was the first to really push blogs mainstream. Obama, social networking. McCain, raising money online that night after the New Hampshire victory. It goes back even further in history. We're seeing it again now with real-time marketing. Real-time marketing, I believe, was born in politics and is now being adopted quickly on Madison Avenue. And of course, politicians are jumping in, further blurring the lines between corporate and culture and political. You see Hillary Clinton tweeting during the Super Bowl, "It's much more fun to watch Fox when someone else is being blitzed and sacked." You see Jindal on the right. "At least we turned the lights out in New Orleans to make it interesting." And of course, my favorite, having grown up in Washington, D.C., Marion Barry, still in elected office, said, "I have to admit, watching Scandal is much more fun than living Scandal." If only we had Twitter in the 80s. So why Twitter? Why is Twitter so impactful and so important with this real time? Scale, 240 million plus active users, 400 million unique visitors to the site, 76% access Twitter via mobile. We were born on mobile. That's why it's 140 characters. SMS initially limited you to 160. That's 20 for your username, 140 for the content. So Twitter was born and remains very much mobile. 1 billion tweets every 2 days. And our relationship to TV is critical. 66% of Twitter users are watching or watch and comment on live events, more than any other platform. 95% of all online public conversation about TV occurs on Twitter. You consider Beyonce here, she also has broken Twitter. So how can you do this? How can you plan to win these moments? We know big moments are coming. We know people are going to want to talk about them. How can we take advantage? Here are these guys, again, looking really no worse for wear and tear over the last 25 years. We remember the original war room. Volume.
First president from the rock and roll generation.
Somebody who's been through a lot of tough elections, James Carville, is known as the Raging Cajun in the business.
So let me tell you what's at stake in this election. It's about George Bush and the whole sleazy little cabal of them. You're going to get tax breaks for the wealthy. You're going to get a guy that doesn't know what a grocery store scanner is. I'm getting sick and tired. I am every single night hearing one of these carping little liberal Democrats jumping all over my you know what.
I'm George Stephanopoulos. I'm Director of Communications.
Bush was on the defensive. Another good night for Bill Clinton. 3 debates, 3 wins. I guarantee you that if you do this, you'll never work in Democratic politics again.
If we cannot believe anything he has said about his past, how can we believe anything he's saying about the future?
Carping little liberals. That is a great hashtag for you TCOT fans. So that was the original war room, and it was highly touted back in 1991 in Little Rock. This was the idea of hitting back when your opponent hit you. What does a war room look like today? The soft drink, the Diet Coke is the only constant. You've got screens on the walls. You've got staffers running around eating fast food. This is from McDonald's, so they had to eat McDonald's. And you have them watching these screens to see what's happening in real time during the Olympics, so McDonald's, a large sponsor of the Olympics, can respond with relevant content. That is how the war room has changed. We see the world, and when we explain this to CMOs of Fortune 500, Fortune 10 companies, we believe the world can be divided up, the marketing world, into these 4 segments. You've got always on, you've got flighted or specific events. At the top, you've got planned events, and at the bottom, you've got unplanned. On the left-hand side, we know every day people are talking about football. We can see the statistics. On the upper right-hand side, we know every weekend there's a football game. On the bottom right-hand side, we know there's a Super Bowl. We don't necessarily know the lights are going to go out, but we're prepared that something unexpected and exciting will happen. The bottom left, these are the unknown unknowns, as Rumsfeld said. Things are going to happen. You're not sure what's going to happen or when, but they will happen. We know that well in campaigns. Let's talk about first these big events. At Twitter, we call this live studio. How can we work with brands to prepare them to be spontaneous and win the moment during these live events? Well, there turns out there's a process here. I've taken a shorter version of a longer deck on this, but what you can do is, first of all, you must identify your moments. For us, that might be debates, that might be primary days, that might be big announcements on the campaign trail. 2 is prepare. Identify where you're going to house this war room, this live studio, and make sure everyone's got an assigned role and responsibility. I remember this from my own campaign work. You had to have a badge to get into the war room. Same thing should happen for these live events. Content. Prepare relevant and meaningful content. What are you going to say? You know your candidate's positions. You know your opponent's positions. Have that content ready. Prepare for potential scenarios. You know what your opponent, if you've done debate prep, you know what your opponent is likely to say. Make sure you hit back with relevant content. Make sure you have an engagement protocol. Who will you respond to? Will you respond to reporters? Will you respond just to supporters, opponents? Will you use hashtags? Which ones? And then finally, make sure you analyze the results to get it better the next time. A recent example, Bank of America. You can see the exact same setup here. Multiple screens, multiple laptops, multiple handheld devices. In real time, they're watching the moment, and they're coming up with responses. You'll hear in a moment from the panel from a woman from AARP who is actively involved in this. How do you make sure you get your message across during the Emmys if you don't know who's going to win? Simple. If you're the AARP, you look for nominees who are 50 plus, and you prepare content just in case they win. Bob Newhart won. They were ready with their content the second he won. They did this with Jeff Daniels as well. And on the right side, Human Rights Campaign received a heads up. They heard what Jason Collins was about to announce. They knew the first a basketball player coming out publicly would be a big deal. They were ready with content to win the moment. Those are big events. How do you do it every day? Every day there's conversations going on. Every day people are talking about jobs on Twitter. Over 50,000, near 60,000 tweets a day with the hashtag jobs. Obamacare. Lord willing, these numbers will decline. But recently we've seen 55,000 tweets a day about Obamacare. How can you reach people in the moment when they're talking about these issues? You can use something called keyword targeting. People are talking about Obamacare on all sides of the issue using hashtags, and advertisers are reaching them. At Twitter, we like to say, you are who you follow, and you are what you tweet. In this case, very literally. If you're tweeting with a hashtag Obamacare, advertisers like House Majority PAC, New York State of Health, the Heritage Foundation, and even healthcare.gov can send promoted tweets into your timeline moments after you've used the hashtag Obamacare. An amazing way to reach people in the moment. You can also scale these moments for TV. I was in a breakout session right before this where there was a conversation about social TV. TV drives a tremendous amount of conversation online. How can you reach people based upon what they're watching? College basketball. I'm sure this will spike even more this weekend. 520,000 tweets during a game. Reality shows, of course, are a great opportunity to be on your phone. And then, of course, Breaking Bad, 324,000 tweets during the finale. How do you reach them? The same way. With conversation targeting, you have people on their couches that are watching Scandal, including Marion Barry somewhere among these little individuals. He is tweeting. Some percentage of the people watching this show are live tweeting it, talking about the characters. The advertiser jumps in. So here Seagram's takes an opportunity to send out a relevant tweet. It's about Scandal. It's about a character in the show. They serve that tweet to the people who are tweeting about or engaging with tweets about the show. This is real-time conversations. Again, in that same breakout, we learned that, believe it or not, Glee fans were Obama supporters, and Blue Blood fans were Romney supporters. Of course, we probably could have figured that out, but using that research, you can now do that across all TV shows. Who do your supporters, or what programs are your supporters watching? Let's target those programs to make sure you reach them. We did this during the State of the Union. In our dashboard, you will see a list of every TV show that's on the air. So media buyers, this makes your job very easy to go digital. What shows are you buying? Type them in. In this case, State of the Union pops up, and you saw Business Roundtable serving tweets to people who are tweeting about or reading tweets or engaging with tweets about the State of the Union. You saw America's Natural Gas doing the same thing. Here in California, Next Gen Climate doing the same thing. And why are they doing it? TV ads and TV conversations combined with Twitter provide a huge impact. 95% stronger message association when a viewer sees the ad on TV as well as on their phone on Twitter. 58% higher purchase intent for brands who are selling items. So I would probably lose my advertising license if I didn't mention Oreo during a conversation about real-time marketing. I'm sure you all remember this moment, February 3rd, 2013, when the lights went out. Oreo jumped on the moment. They sent out this brilliant tweet. It's okay, you can still dunk in the dark. Huge, huge impact. It was the tweet of the year as far as marketing. They won every award that is given to advertisers. They were called genius, brilliant. How did they do it? You may also recall just 10 days later, Senator Rubio gave the rebuttal to the State of the Union. He took a drink of water. The water was Poland Spring. It started trending immediately on Twitter. People waited an hour, 2 hours, 5 hours. Where is Poland Spring? This is their moment. How often is Poland Spring going to trend on Twitter? They missed. Within the span of 10 days, real-time marketing went from being genius, brilliant, awe-inspiring to where the hell are you when you don't do it? In such a short period, real-time marketing became mandatory. I'll close with this quote from a marketer. Marketers must take a critical look at how they can turn their one-off, real-time reactions into permanent evolutions of the way their brands behave. We started real-time marketing. Rapid response comes from many of the people in this room in your careers in politics. Madison Avenue has adopted it. The real-time space is getting crowded. Political campaigns have to work even harder to be real-time to cut through the noise in 2014. Thank you so much again for your attention, and I look forward to the panel to hear more about this topic.
Thanks, Peter. All right, we're going to keep this moving, go right into the panel. Most of you know Brian Franklin. We knew him because for a couple of years we thought he was on the board of directors because he kept tweeting us to tell us how behind we were in technology, so we finally put him on the board of directors, put him in charge of technology. But his biography or credits are in the book. You can read about him, all the startup companies that he's advised. What's more important is last night, he and Doc Schweitzer became the beer pong champions. Now that's something that matters. Brian Franklin.
Thank you, Art. Thank you. We're going to get right to it. We're going to bring up Corey Vale of Bass Digital, Sarah Lang-Hendricks of the AARP, and Kevin Eckery of Eckery & Associates. Let's have a big hand for them. Thank you. Nice to see you again. Sarah, let me just give you a couple of brief, you can read the full bios in the book, but Sarah is the social media manager for the AARP. Previous to that was Barack Obama's tweeter, in charge of other social media pieces as well, right? And so, yeah, Barack Obama did not do all of his own tweets. Did he do any of his own tweets?
He has done his own tweets. They're pictures, so you can find them on the internet. Okay. But we did most of them.
Great. Corey Vale from Bass Digital Media, digital director for Pollie and Gingrich campaigns, as well as for John McCain on the Senate campaign. Were there multiple people tweeting, or did John McCain tweet?
John McCain would tweet, but he would tweet through someone else. Okay. He would say, tweet this right now. So that's how he would tweet.
And Kevin Eckery of Eckery & Associates, Strategic Communications and Public Affairs, was the press secretary to Pete Wilson and a political analyst for NBC. Sarah, we were talking earlier, and you described the feeling of tweeting for Barack Obama. What was that feeling?
Terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. You know that if you have a typo, if you make a mistake, it's going to end up in the newspaper, but also on Tumblr, and your parents are going to text you about it. Maybe that was just me, but my mom gets really upset about misplaced commas. So you know that anything you're doing is being seen by millions of people and in fairly immediate time. If you put something on Facebook that's even the littlest bit controversial, you'll find out in the first 5 comments, and you'll have your phone, blowing up with emails and tweets, and everyone wants to know why you did that, why you said that. But it's also a really cool opportunity when you get to go out on something, like immediately after the president announces support of gay marriage. Mm-hmm. That can be a really cool moment too. So there's a terror, but there's also an excitement.
And does that terror ever go away? I mean, do you get used to it?
I don't think it ever entirely goes away, but you get used to it as a piece of what you're doing. In the same way that I think, I haven't done a lot of on-camera appearances, but I imagine being a spokesperson for a candidate is fairly similar, because you always know if you're being recorded that you can mess up, but it's part of the cost of doing business.
Corey, was it similar for you?
It was. I think there's always that moment, the moment you hit that button to think about it and wonder, did something happen? And we were talking about this earlier. You figure out really quick where you made the mistakes, because for some reason the people that want to chime in on the mistakes chime in right away. It's usually the first comment, so you tend to see it. But I agree with Sarah. I don't think it goes away. There's always a little bit of nervousness when you're doing it at that scale.
That's probably, sorry, not to interrupt, but that's probably healthy, right? Like, you don't want to be speaking out to millions of people with no consequence. You don't want to be in a position where you don't have a little bit of restraint. I think that would actually be a much more frightening proposition.
I agree, but it also brings out the fact that Twitter is a more in some ways it's a riskier form of communication because there's a lower bar to communicating. I mean, you can tweet like that when then the afterthought is not necessarily, you know, good. But you make up for it by the simple fact that that tweet will be replaced by the next one. And just like you said, being on camera, you get used to it. You never totally forget you're on camera. You never totally forget that you're the object of public attention on Twitter either. But you overcome your Twitter fright by volume. I mean, you just do it. And if you sit there and hyperanalyze and constantly, you know, make sure that you've got every comma correct and that you're using the proper grammar, etc. Well, when the committee's done and 2 days later when you've done that tweet, it's possible you missed the cycle.
Let's talk about the process here. I mean, you kind of alluded to the committee and in each of these cases where, you know, we were tweeting for, or not necessarily tweeting for a governor, but, you know, tweeting for a public affairs, on a public affairs issue or for Barack Obama. First of all, how many people were involved in this process at that level? For Barack Obama, how many people were involved in the origins of a tweet to you pressing the button?
A lot. It depended a lot on what we were tweeting. So if it was simple, you know, Barack Obama needs your support, chip in $5 today, then it probably only went through 3 or 4 rounds of approvals. If it was, I know, it's a lot of approvals for something that's very standard messaging, but that was how it was. And that was partly to make sure that there were enough people who knew what was going on in the news cycle, what else could be misinterpreted, how that would play. You know, you always want to have checks and balances when you're operating at that kind of level. For something that was more controversial or for something even that was outside the realm of sort of vetted, you know, photos. So if we were looking at using a photo of Michelle Obama doing exercise in the White House garden, that might go through 10 or 12 or 14 layers of approval. So it just depended a lot on the content. But baseline, anything that went up on that account had at least 3 sign-offs.
And I would agree with that. I think it depends on the campaign. Obviously, at the presidential level, there's some dependencies that you don't have in other campaigns. I think for me, it's been the comfort level of a campaign manager and a candidate. That's really what it comes down to. Some campaign managers are very comfortable with that, and some campaign managers are just not comfortable with that. And I think the job of digital folks is to kind of help them see the landscape and figure out kind of, as you said, some tweets are somewhat benign. You know, it's you know, Barack Obama or John McCain, whoever it is, needs your support today. That's a fairly safe tweet, right? And then some are really contain some messaging for the day that could throw off something that really do need to get a good look.
I mean, many people in the audience, and by the way, some of you are probably tweeting and live tweeting, and we'll be looking at this later on the screen, so you know, be careful what you wish for, I suppose. But many people in the audience, especially some of the digital strategists, digital directors for campaigns, they're the whole staff for, you know, when it comes to social media. It might be that they tweet for 5, 6 different campaigns, and perhaps there are people within the campaigns that are authorized to, you know, on our call, you know, kind of pre-call. You talked a little bit about giving people the empowerment to tweet. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. So I'd say in most situations that aren't a presidential campaign, you probably don't need 4 layers of approval for every tweet that goes up. And you probably should have more than one person who's empowered to actually tweet from that account or to respond to things on Twitter. So even on the Obama campaign, we had, you know, the main Barack Obama account, but we also had Obama 2012, we had Jeremy Byrd was tweeting, Mitch Stewart was tweeting, we had a whole host of voices. You know, most of our communications department were very actively tweeting. So if something came up, maybe we couldn't get something on the official account within 5 minutes, but if it was a field-related thing, Jeremy Byrd could respond right away on his account. We had different people who could jump in and who could post tweets. And right now, I'm at the ARP. We have a social media team of 9 people, which is absolutely incredible and not a world I ever thought I'd live in. But we're working even beyond our team of 9 people who are all empowered to tweet from the ARP account to empower other folks in the building to have their voices heard. So if something comes up on cost of living adjustments, you know, the chain CPI, maybe it's a Friday night and I'm not sitting at my phone and I don't know every in and out of chain CPI, but I know that David Sertner, one of our lobbyists, is able to hop on Twitter and to respond to that in real time, and then we can retweet him or we can share that messaging. So I think making sure that you don't just have one person who's empowered, because what if that person gets sick? What if that person gets hit by a bus? You know, you're not going to be in a very good spot.
Or what if they want to take a shower?
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, I worked on campaigns for too long, but taking a shower was really hard the first 7 months of the Obama campaign because I was the person posting every tweet. I wasn't necessarily the person writing every single tweet, but I was the person posting every one of those tweets. So if I wanted to be offline for 10 minutes, whether it was to take a shower or to eat dinner, that was really hard, and I had to hope something didn't happen. And so I think the more people that okay, you guys laugh, but it was really stressful. And so I think that's really colored as I move forward, you know, as I'm working at the AARP, bringing as many people as possible into that conversation who can be spokespeople, whether through the main brand account, through some of our sub accounts, or through their own personal accounts, so that there's always someone who's able to respond, and preferably the person who really is the expert in the area and is able to speak with more nuance than necessarily your community manager could.
Kevin, would you advise that candidates themselves or maybe CEOs or heads of organizations that they also have access to tweet their own messaging, or is this something that you try and keep insulated?
You know, it's a great question, and the answer is it's a high wire act. I mean, there are some people who really are naturals, they grasp the technology, but they understand that Twitter isn't a strategy, it's a tool. Mm-hmm. And in those cases, you know, you may take them out in baby steps and definitely, you know, lead them on to the Twitterverse. But it is a two-edged sword unless people really are familiar with the world in which they're operating. And as communicators, we have sort of an obligation to educate our clients and to educate others, and not just, you know, the messaging, but how to use the messaging and how to use the technology. It's not good enough to simply say, you know, here are the approved tweets. You have to give people some feeling and some understanding, I guess is the word I'm looking for. People who have been managing the social media in organizations until very recently were in some ways like, you're the person who speaks Spanish in the organization. So we're not going to let you have your own voice, but you're going to translate for everybody else. And we're not going to pay too much attention to you because we don't understand the value of what you're talking about. But finally, that value has become apparent. And as Peter pointed out in his presentation, I mean, this is a fabulous new world for people who understand how to use it, not just for the people who've been using it.
Let's go, I mean, Peter referenced the Rumsfeldian unknown unknowns. There are the known knowns, and there are the known unknowns. The known knowns, you might know that an event is coming on a certain date, or some sort of, or your own press release is going to pop on a certain date, so you can prepare your responses and you can prepare your creative potentially ahead of time. Seems fairly straightforward. I think it was brilliant that Nabisco managed to cut the power just to have that ad. You know, but there are maybe known unknowns where there's an event. Perhaps it's a Supreme Court decision. You know it's coming, but you don't know what the outcome is going to be. You can prepare for one or the other, or that you know that there's something about your candidate perhaps that's going to come out, and you've already prepared a response, but you don't know when it's going to pop. We had that in we did the Patrick Murphy race against Allen West, and we knew one of the big fights in that race was towards the very end. It came out that there was an ad that had a mugshot from when Patrick Murphy was arrested at the age of 19. Well, we already knew what our responses were going to be to that, and we were able to respond accordingly, but we just didn't know when it was going to occur. So it was just, we had to be ready to pop. How do you, then we get to the unknown unknowns, which you just have to have a team ready to pull it together. But when you know, talk about the process of creating either whether it's tweets or images that you're going to put forward. Talk about the process that you go through when you know that something's coming, but you don't know when it's coming, the known unknowns.
Yeah, I think Peter alluded to it very well, which is you have to have research and you really do have to prepare. I think that's the campaigns we deal with. I think that's one of the challenges that they get to is it becomes an afterthought very quickly. I think you do have to prepare. You have to sit with research and really understand. There are some known moments in campaigns that are going to pop a lot of news. Debate night, election night. Like we know those are coming, right. But we don't know exactly what's going to happen in the middle of that debate, and most of them are fairly predictable, honestly. There's a few that'll have a surprise here and there that you have to be ready for. But just having a good research team where you really have a mapped out strategy ahead of time, I think is the part where, as a digital strategist, I want to try to help campaigns get to that place where they can think like that. I think most campaigns think about the press release that they want to send out or the two they want to send out in the middle, but how do we translate that into the digital space, I think is what we have to help them with. And again, Peter's presentation highlighted it very well. The second screen is there. Everybody is, when you're watching television, people are tweeting and doing all the other things they do electronically while they're watching television. It's become a little, the TV kind of is in the background now, and your phone becomes kind of a primary object sometimes. I would always note on the Newt Gingrich campaign, every time that we would watch, like on Chartbeat, we'd watch the real-time traffic on the website. And every time he was on television, if he said the website, just somewhere in his speech, the traffic would go up 20x. You just watch it immediately happen. And so I think as strategists, it's important for us to educate campaigns and help them and figure out a plan for the known unknowns, I think is what you were getting at. And so, again, I think there's already research that's already out there, but I think the digital team's responsibility is to pull all that together.
Was there a budget line, and this goes for any of you, was there a budget line that was, in case of emergency, break glass for social media, where whether it was Twitter or something else, where you knew, okay, we're going to have to promote the hell out of this, or out of something in the future, and we're just going to put some money aside in the budget to make sure that that's a little emergency fund?
Yeah, we have done that in campaigns, absolutely. Because again, I think, like for a debate night, you have a pretty good sense of what questions are going to be asked. There's always surprises, but you have a sense of it. At least you can plan for those things, and there's always curveballs, and you have to address those. But I think it's important to make sure that there's at least a plan in place for the stuff you do know is going to happen.
Well, and you never want to be in the position where, there's a hashtag trending about your candidate and you don't have the $3,000 it would take to run a promoted tweet. Right. Like, that's being caught with your pants down. And so I think, for any campaign that can afford it, yes, you should always have a little bit of money set aside just for, whether it's a known unknown or a total surprise, so that you're able to take advantage of that opportunity. And I would just go a step further on the research. I think research is great. I think also knowing your online community is really important. Like, a lot of what we're talking about is very Twitter specific, but there is a Facebook component, there are Reddit components or Tumblr, depending on what candidate you're working for, what campaign you're working on. And the more you know your audience, the better you're going to be able to respond rapidly, no matter what the situation is. So if you know that your audience is going to respond really well to a volunteer ask, just in general, then when something comes up, you know that you can pivot to that ask. If you know that your audience is particularly, suited to talking about certain kinds of issues, then you know that you'll need to respond differently on those kinds of issues than maybe a more generic issue. Like, you should always have someone on your digital team or the agency that you're working with who can break down the gender, differences on Facebook and Twitter, who can look at sort of who your audience is, whether that's different from your main audience. So like AARP, we know that our social properties skew a little bit younger. We're looking at more of the 45 to 65 demographic than necessarily some of our, printed properties, which makes total sense if you think about it. But you should have someone who knows exactly what your target demographic is, as well as your actual demographics on your social properties, so that when you head into those moments, you know how to respond better.
Yeah, and I think that highlights also one of the really important elements of dealing with social media, which is that it's still media, and that you don't have to unlearn or relearn the things you know about communicating. You just need to realize you now have a whole new digital space in which to operate. And two of the key things that you need to keep in mind is that first, proper communication, regardless of the medium, has to imitate a conversation. And so part of being in a conversation, the second and equally important part of that conversation is to listen. And what Sarah's describing are simply ways of sort of digital listening. Okay, you have to make sure when you're using social media that you're relevant. You have to make sure that you're attractive. You have to make sure that you're responsive, and you have to make sure that you're not sort of that half beat off, so that whenever you choose to enter into the digital space, that you're irrelevant. And it's a challenge to do that, but again, don't think of it as a separate strategy. Think of it as here is our wheelhouse. Here are the things we want to communicate, need to communicate. Here's how we plan our communication strategies, always with a demographic or sometimes even an individual in mind, so that these things aren't abstract talking points. These things are directed at real people, and that you're willing to engage as those tweets come back to you. As soon as you know you're getting, we call them Twitter wars, but let's face it, they're not really wars, they're conversations. And when you are invested in those and you're actually galvanizing and getting people's attention, you know that things are working.
And I feel like that's the space where maybe the political side of things is not quite caught up to the corporate side of things. Brands are very, very responsive on Twitter. If you criticize most major brands, you'll hear back in about 30 seconds. And it's true from airlines to hotels to food chains. You get pretty rapid responses from most of the major brands. And I think a lot of candidates and political groups have been slower to enter that space, particularly in moments of crisis. And I think that that's a place where we have great opportunity, but also people feel, I think, more cautious than they need to about actually having conversations and dialogues.
They're trying to control the conversation. How do you keep it conversational when structurally, essentially, you have to be careful, you have to be on message, and you have to go through an approval process in cases of larger campaigns. Yeah. But on a day-to-day basis, what are some of the things that you would do to keep it conversational, and some of the tactics and what kind of tone would you use?
Well, I guess one of the pieces of advice I would give to people is that when you break down sort of the volume of your tweets, there are going to be a lot of them that follow your talking points, that follow your very established message houses, so to speak. But it's important in doing that at least the tone be conversational. It's also important to recall that when you're in the digital space, you're also brand building. You're brand building for your initiative, for your candidate, whatever you're doing. And that part of brand building also translates into sort of the ancient art of localizing and personalizing, because that's how you build a story to get people to break down the candidate as an institution, or to break down institutions into human form. So you have the opportunity to say 2/3 or 3/4 of your tweets for any given client or candidate ought to be focused on message, ought to be focused on the platform, whatever it is. But make sure to reserve a sizable portion of your space for humanizing. And that's where you can, this is where the rules change. I've told people and candidates for years, indulge in humor at your own expense. Now you have to indulge in humor in order to attract an audience to your Twitter feed.
Yeah, I mean, look at Marion Barry's tweet, which I don't know if he did himself or someone else did for him, but that was a remarkable, almost counterintuitive tweet where you wouldn't necessarily remind people of a scandal,
he managed to get reelected, but he managed to get reelected in a district with a mugshot. So I don't know how risky that was for him. I think the rules might be different for Marion Barry.
I don't think for most people you highlight your scandal, but I think you do highlight, the personal side of the candidate, the fun side of the candidate. And so if you watch, the Obama campaign and then later the Obama White House, there are pictures of the dogs up all the time because, first of all, people on the internet love a good dog photo. And second of all, it's showing, a more fun side of the president. And so are those photos on message? Not really. They're showcasing, who the candidate and later who the president is as a person. And yes, they try and peg them to news hooks. There was a really cute one for opening day.
Were those planned out, by the way, or were those things that happened in, today's a slow news day, we really don't have a whole lot to talk about, let's show Bo?
Well, I will say, I have nothing to do with anything that happens in the White House right now, so I couldn't tell you about those specifically. But in general, I think it's good to have evergreen content, whether that's fun content or on message, serious content.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked about the word media, but the other word is social, right? You actually have to be, it's a social platform for people to communicate. And I agree with Sarah. I think brands are well ahead of where we are in politics. And there's so many questions that come through on every candidate's Twitter feed that people really want to know information, and oftentimes it's not controversial. Right. Yeah. It's where do you stand on guns? Where do you stand on immigration? And that is a great opportunity. It's not a complex tweet. It's here's where I stand and here's a link. Thanks for asking. That type of just simple back and forth interaction, I think, does begin to humanize a candidate. And then there's moments of humor and other things, but yeah. just using Twitter or any other social platform, as Lieutenant Governor said, as just a one-way, broadcast communication is not really what it's there for. It is there to humanize, and it's also there to communicate with voters.
But it also points out a couple things. One is that we're a conservative industry, and that there are still people, and I know you're in this room, but I won't name names, who are very proud of the fact you don't have a Facebook account. You're very proud of the fact you don't do Twitter. See, I told you I'm not going to name names, okay? And that's something for those other people. And you're still going to use mailing lists that probably have folks who died in 1976 on it, because no one is ever going to criticize you for doing mail. We can't even get people to buy enough cable TV because for some reason they think that buying their target voter on Duck Dynasty is beneath them when instead they want to pay more to buy their target voter on the evening news. I don't get it. Your target voter doesn't care either. So when you think about the risk-averse nature of our industry, it is difficult sometimes to bring in the more freewheeling, I won't call it spontaneous because it requires a lot of planning and anticipation, but less controllable digital space. And that scares the hell out of most campaign managers.
In part also because a lot of the ways that people understand how Twitter works come out of scandals. I mean, there was a lot of news. Yeah. Not every candidate obviously goes as far as Anthony Weiner, but we learn a lot about Twitter and rapid response when those things happen, a lot more than some people imagine. But
actually, we should have invented Anthony Weiner. I mean, the way he promoted the key elements of online communication gave us a lot to talk about.
Absolutely. So, I mean, let's talk about when candidates go rogue. Not quite that far, but when they start to say things that something comes out of. I don't know if this ever happened to you with any of your candidates, like Newt Gingrich or whatever, but something comes out of their mouth that's unexpected. Let's say. What do you do then? Do you immediately go to Twitter and get in the conversation right away, or is there a period of time where you're taking the temperature of Twitter? Do you sit back and you look at it and you go, oh well, let's see where this goes and see how this plays out?
Yeah, I think it was mentioned earlier. It's sort of, you got to know your community and know your audience and know what's happening. I mean, the beauty of Twitter, as Peter talked, it is real time. Like, you do get a real-time assessment of what's happening very, very quickly. You really don't have to wait more than a few minutes to really get a sense of kind of where that's going. And then I think, my advice to most candidates is to get in the conversation, to actually be somewhat offensive and walk in there. And sometimes it requires humor and sometimes it just requires clarification. Mm-hmm. But standing back and just waiting for the message to move typically does not yield good results in my experience.
But I would say the listening is really key there. Whether or not it's a scandal or whether it's just something that breaks in the news, you do get responses pretty quickly. So I'll use one example from AARP, which was not anything that we did. But on Valentine's Day, House of Cards Season 2 came out. How many of you watched it? A bunch, yeah. So I was enjoying a nice, lovely Valentine's Day dinner when I went to check Twitter and noticed that there were a lot more mentions on the AARP account than there generally would be. And it was because AARP came up in episode 3. And it was nothing that we knew was coming. It was nothing we had any idea, what it was about. And it certainly wasn't anything we'd taken a position on. But it was something that people are having a conversation about, and they were mentioning us over and over and over again. And so I went home and I watched the entire season. Hey, if I had to do it for work, I had to do it for work. And in that case, there wasn't anything particularly for us to say. It was just that we'd been mentioned on a show and people wanted to talk about it and people were really eager about the second season of House of Cards. But there wasn't anything for us to do. We just needed to know that that conversation was happening understand what the parameters of that conversation were, and then make an informed decision about whether or not to jump in. And in that case, there wasn't anything for us to say.
When you do jump in, do you jump in with a single tweet? I mean, or do you continuously tweet or repeat the same thing? I mean, it's a stream, and people are dipping in and out of it at different points in time during the day. We talked about you were you were a spokesperson during the 97 earthquake or 96, the Northridge quake?
The Northridge quake, right.
So, people are looking for information, but they're not always looking at the same time. Do you keep repeating things, or do you just put it out there and you've done your job and you move on and wait for the next item?
And the answer again is you listen and find out. Okay. I mean, I was criticizing us for being a conservative industry, but by that same token, it's still a matter of impressions. And so if through the Twitterverse you find you've made your impression, great. But still, you're not going to get criticized for giving that same speech to 100 different audiences. And you just have to make sure that you've served your audiences, served your client, and served the purpose.
Well, and if it is something that needs to be repeated, think if there are more interesting ways that you can repeat it. I mean, I think a lot of times people who've come through a more sort of traditional communications background think of like, oh, well, we'll do another press release. We'll do a very similar messaging. And when it comes to Twitter, when it comes to sort of this sphere, there are a lot of other ways you can get your point across. So one of the things that we've been talking about a lot this winter at AARP is, go check on your older neighbors when there are all these storms. There are a lot of storms. There are a lot of people who are, not able to get out of their houses because of snow, or they're running out of provisions, or gas has gotten really expensive, things like that. If we just tweet every day, hey, go check on your neighbors, people are going to tune us out. People are going to tune us out really quickly, and they're not going to hear that important message. So we have to figure out ways. Are there stories that we can highlight? Are there videos? Can we do a top 5 ways to help your community during a storm? Like, what are the interesting ways that we can repackage that same message that we need to be getting out there? And to keep it updated and fresh so that by the 18th storm of the season, people aren't just tuning us out.
Sarah, when we were talking earlier, you mentioned the army of retweeters. Can you talk a little bit about that concept? And also, if we could put the PowerPoint presentation up on the screen, we'll go through a couple more minutes, and then we'll take some questions, and then after that, we'll take a look at and see your reviews on Twitter. So if you want to follow any of our guests.
So I will say, I didn't call it the army of tweeters just because I think there are too many war references when it comes to Twitter. But I think the idea of having a group of people who are dedicated to your message and willing to help share it is really important for campaigns. And it's something that we've talked about for years and years, whether those are volunteers on the ground, whether those are people who are reading every email you send. They're the people who are really committed to your message and to getting your message out. And when we're looking at the Twitter sphere in particular, there are going to be folks who hopefully are influential or have large Twitter followings who are really dedicated, who want to help your campaign, and they need to know how. And so one of the ways you can do that is by building an email list of people. Email is one way to do it, there are other ways. But building a list of people, either internal to the campaign or external, and giving them messaging, telling them this is the most important message that you can share today. OFA did some emails where they would send a share graphic, and they would say, this is the graphic we want you to share today. And it was one action. It was a very clear thing that supporters could do. And then they were done. They felt like, okay, I spent 30 seconds, I benefited the campaign, and I'm done. And it was a really nice break from asking people for money, to be honest.
Corey, actually, the three of you you're all doing association work, you've all done corporate work. Mm-hmm. What are some of the things that corporations are doing on social media, particularly Twitter and real-time marketing, that political campaigns generally aren't doing?
Yeah, I think if I could just real quick, I wanted to speak to that because we've done that on almost every campaign we've been a part of, and it has proven to be very valuable. And that is, people do get tired of being asked for money. People, it's usually you can walk doors, you walk neighborhoods, knock on doors, and make phone calls. That's sort of some of your options at certain stages of the campaign. Mm-hmm. It's great to, we've had some campaigns to get 100 people in a room and say, you are our, Twitter army, or whatever word you want to use. And here's what we're asking of you. We're asking, we're going to send you an email at the beginning of the day. Here's kind of the message for the day. Here's a graphic we're posting. Share it, retweet it. It actually does make a difference if 100 people retweet every tweet a candidate throws up there. That actually gets attention of reporters, and it really does. Those kind of things do matter. And so when we've done those in campaigns, it's been very successful. I think to pivot to your question about brands, I think part of the challenge with it is some of it's resources, right? And you don't always want to go back to that, but we haven't talked about it at all yet. So, not every social media group has 9 people that are working with it, right? Lots of campaigns have maybe 1, maybe 2. They have an agency, So I think corporate has an advantage in that, is that they can kind of get all this stuff together ahead of time and get a lot of people in the room to make those decisions. I do think, though, that political campaigns can begin to mirror that by listening to their volunteer base in their community and figuring out who in that group is creative, who in the group seems to have an eye for this, and kind of, utilize that labor force, if you will, to help them with some creativity where there may not be resources to pay for 9 bodies that can do social media all day. In fact, even some of the largest campaigns, that's just not a reality. Yeah. And so, but it still applies, which is getting smart people in a room to get creative, and then let that kind of filter through the agency or the digital director to then figure out which are the best to use of that.
Kevin, is it easier to personalize a brand or an organization than it is to personalize a politician?
In some ways it is, yeah, because people recognize the value of Oreos more than they recognize the value of a politician. So you've got that going for you. But, in highlighting the differences about, how corporations might handle this, or candidates, or associations, or whatever, I think that it's fair to say that the people who seem to handle it the best are going to be corporate marketing folks. Because at the corporate marketing level, they're managing a brand, they're very much attuned to their customers, assuming that they're good at it, and most people are. They're attuned to their customers, they know who they're selling to, they have an idea of how to keep that conversation going. I think that when you look at corporations and you begin to see their corporate affairs or government affairs, things like that, that the attention and the dedication to their craft dips precipitously, because in a corporation, the things that we do still are at a staff function rather than a line function. And so there's simply less corporate attention given to those kinds of things. And there I think they can learn that corporations, when it comes to their public affairs work and crisis work, can learn from us. Yeah. Because those kinds of things are our line function. Those are things that we are created to do and that we do every day in our businesses and for our clients. And I think that that's something where we can give them examples. But the one key thing is that nobody has more resources than corporate marketing. I mean, as you all know, we all spend a great deal of time seeking those kinds of clients. And when we get the check from the marketing department instead of the government relations department, we're all really happy. And that's just something we all have to realize.
Great. What we're going to do is I'm going to just take you through a summary of some of these tips. And if you have a question, please raise your hand, and one of the people with a microphone will come to you, I think, is the deal. So just to summarize, try to have more than one person empowered in your organization so that you can actually take a shower at some point during the campaign. And we're going to put all these are on the website. If you go to, we'll show you the link at the end. Keep it conversational. Make sure your tweets are in line with your strategy. I know that's self-evident, but make sure that if you're a social media manager or a digital manager, go back and check your strategy. Make sure before you tweet, before you press send, because once you put it out there, right, odds are you can't easily delete it. Keep some money back in case that you have to do some paid social media advertising. Build an army. Well, I used army. That was my word. Sorry. An army of retweeters. If you can get people to share your responses, and it gives them something to do. For people that like to sit in front of the computer all day. Have internal protocols to make sure you can get timely approvals. We really didn't discuss this much, but it's a challenge, right? When you have your candidate or campaign managers or have fundraising events and something's happening, to go back and get those approvals for those tweets, right? So you said 5 minutes at some point. I mean, that's impressive with all those levels, but you had a major team.
You get people in the same room and impressive things can happen quickly. And that's really, I think, a lot of it is for known events in particular, I mean, the reason that Oreo had that winning ad was that they had the people who were empowered to make the decisions all in a room together.
Right.
So they could just look around a table, have that conversation, and get it up. And I think, you know, for any known events, you should definitely have a war room, but you also need to be ready to sort of pull that together during unknown events as well.
Some events are predictable, those known knowns or those known unknowns. So try and get ahead of those where you can. Plan your creative as much as possible. Get your graphic designers at the ready if you know something's happening, but you're not sure how it's going to lay out. Try to be funny if you can. I suppose if you're good at it, right? If you know your team isn't particularly funny, maybe that's not the best tactic, and that could fail. Keep talking, and then keep listening. Use rich media where you can. Images work better than tweets by themselves. Does it?
Yeah. Peter probably has more of the statistics on this, but certainly just anecdotally, an image gets much more engagement than
Peter,
than
is there a big difference in images and infographics? Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, images, infographics, videos, we see a much higher engagement. I think that cuts across not only Twitter, but also Facebook, Google+, other platforms. People love that content.
Yeah, and again, that shouldn't be a surprise to any of us. I mean, we know that we've heard, I think, pictures speak 1,000 words. You know, it's more than the 140, but it's 10 times more effective, I guess.
Try and leverage behind-the-scenes access to help personalize your brand and give people a sense of inclusion. Take advantage of exclusivity. You know, see it here on Twitter, see it here on Facebook or Google+ or somewhere else, so that you can drive people to the story or drive people to your posts and get them perhaps out of that stream. So with that, I'd like to thank the panel, and do we have?
Let's take a few questions.
Sorry?
A few questions.
A few questions. Let's go.
Well, thank you very much. It was quite interesting to listen to you. I have a question that I actually tweeted, but anyway. I wanted to ask if you had any research on at what time of the day, if you want to post something from your candidate, a message, you know, selfish thing that the candidate wants to get out there, nothing funny. What time of the day would you try to push it out to get retweets and some traffic?
And what day? I would add, is there a better day for Twitter? And maybe Peter could speak to this as well. Also, if you could put the Twitter feed on the screen, and we can enjoy that too.
Yeah, I can just briefly say, I think it really is community dependent. I know there's global answers to that, where I'm sure all of Twitter, there's certain days that pop more than others, but just my experience campaign to campaign, it really does depend on the community. It depends on the demographics, it depends on kind of, you know, there's certainly kind of the morning window and then the evening window, and we try to hit both of those, whether it be on Facebook or Twitter or wherever it may be. Twitter tends to be more the all-day window, but there's definitely, you know, I think the wake-up time tends to be a pretty good time in our experience. And again, I don't know what the global numbers are offhand, but anyway, I think it does depend on your community.
And I think it depends. There's the community issue, but then also remember I said all your tweets, all your news releases, you have a conversation and a real target in mind. For us, most of our communication is aimed at the media, and so for them, 8 to 10 in the morning is a key time to get it. Plus, in the evening, somewhere around 4 is a nice way of again getting in the conversation. And what we found is that there's the cadre of folks who are sort of, I'll call it the media campaign complex, which are people like us, along with our reporter friends, all seem to get together around the same time to trade notes, trade quips, trade information, trade opportunities. And so in that set of audiences, there really is the morning, evening window that you should keep in mind and respect as much as possible.
So I would say, actually, I agree with that wholeheartedly, but I would caution when you're thinking about the morning and evening window to think about the lives of the people that you're trying to reach out to. So I found a lot that the evening commute is a terrible time to talk to people. Yeah. It's fine if you're inside the Beltway because everyone takes the metro. But if you're almost anywhere else in the country, people are driving. And so if people are driving, they're probably not checking their phones, or at least they shouldn't be checking their phones, so don't encourage that kind of behavior. But so if you think about the lives of the people you're reaching out to, if you're working for a candidate who's very religious, and they go to church every Sunday, then there's a good chance a lot of their voters are also going to church every Sunday. So you're probably not going to see really high rates of engagement during church. If your people are, largely, working from 9 to 5, then their windows within that when they'll be sort of bored and checking Twitter. So getting to know your community is really key there.
Yeah.
We got a question over there, and then I have a question about Twitter wars.
Yeah, this is a little off the subject, but I'm Dennis Johnson from George Washington University. I spent a year in China. We're not the only people who retweet. There's something called the 50 Cent Party of 600,000 freelancers who every day are given the party line, and they respond to newspapers and other things that are critical of them. And we found this out in the Huffington Post, which became one of those critical media outlets that the 50 Cent Party was going after. So we're not the only ones.
Thank you. When you have a troll, and for those someone that's beating you up on your feed, how do you react to that? As from a campaign's perspective, do you block them? Do you just let the conversation happen and let your supporters take over, or do you actively engage the discussion?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to find out how many followers they have. Because candidates, understandably, can see something like that and get very concerned, or a campaign manager, and then come to find out the person has one follower and it's not him. And so, I think it's important to kind of put it into context first when stuff like that comes up. Secondly, I also think, humor is a great tool in combating sort of someone who's being a little too excited. I also think, though, that the community does respond. And especially I've noticed on Facebook, the community really, we're doing a race in Illinois, and some of the comments, I'm surprised people put those comments next to their face. It surprises me they would do that, but they do anyway. But the community jumps right in. People do. They jump right in and they respond to that person. And so my experience is most of the time it does get handled by the community, but every once in a while you need to respond.
It's hard to get candidates to, particularly in smaller races, to understand that that's going to happen. That in the beginning of a campaign, the initial response is everybody comes in, and then you're like, no, people will take care of it, but they want you to sterilize the thing. Totally. I mean, were you under pressure to sterilize the feed?
No. I mean, there was certainly no pressure to sterilize the feed. I think there was pressure to have, sort of a set of guidelines, community standards. So if you want to come on and be racist, if you want to come on and use words that are not appropriate for a family-friendly environment, if you want to use slurs, then that's not something that we would necessarily tolerate. So, if you want to come out and say something that I couldn't print in the newspaper, then there was going to be sort of a community standard of enforcement there. In general, I think the first thing I learned on the internet was don't feed the trolls, and I think that's true on a personal level and on a candidate level. Generally speaking, if people are just out to cause trouble, it's not worth responding to them. But you do want to be sure, first of all, how many followers, how much influence they have, but also, do they have a legitimate concern or gripe or something you can fix? So if someone's upset with you because they couldn't use your online polling place lookup to find their place to vote, well, then you shouldn't ignore them. You should help them figure out how to vote. And if they're upset because they donated and they found out that you're taking a position that they're not a huge fan of, well, then maybe you can help clarify that position. If they're upset because of a fundamental characteristic of your candidate, you're not going to get anywhere with them. So I do think you have to do some sort of community standard setting and then figuring out on a case-by-case basis how to address it.
And I think the advice to not feed the trolls is number one. And number two is you're going to have a constant battle with your candidate who will usually be more sensitive to these things than is warranted. And part of that is that for whatever reason, candidates want to be loved, and the fact is no one's going to love them. So as often as possible, keep reminding your candidate that you're shooting for respect, not for love. It won't always help, but it'll make you feel better.
And if I could just say, I also think it's because it's their name, right, and not ours, right? It's their name, and so I think that I think we have to kind of help candidates see that piece. So
Well, and help them understand that it's sort of a normal piece of being on the internet. That if you're a candidate on the internet, you're going, and all candidates should be on the internet in some way, shape, or form, you're going to get a certain number of people who are making those kind of comments. And I think sometimes taking it out of the personal context, so it's not you that they're attacking so much as
There's
you're
the
a
image,
candidate
right?
on
There's
the
the image of you. It's not you. Yeah.
Elena, I think we got one more question in the back.
Yeah, I just have a final question. This is for Sarah. David Letterman just announced that he's going to retire in 2015. Does the AARP have anything exciting to say about that?
I did see that before I came up here. I don't have an official response, but if they would like to hire me, I could probably make it happen.
Well, with that, I'd like to thank this great panel, and thank you for your attention, and we'll hope you're having a great time. Thank you.
Thanks.
We're running a little late, so if you haven't noted it in your schedule, there is a technological pub crawl that's about to take place all the way down the hall and up the escalator to the Hillcrest rooms. You can go from station to station and hear from Pandora, voter mapping, poll makers, call fire, labels and lists, and home team sports. It's to be followed by the Tech and Tales, as in cocktails, which Brian helped put together in the room right next door. And then at 5:30, sort of one of the signature parts of our entire program is going to be the Hall of Fame induction ceremony right here. You need to be here to find out the secret code words to get into the great after party at the Hard Rock Hotel, brought to us by our friends at Pandora. So thank you.